What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Shooting It Straight with yours truly, Justin Jackson, and my man John, the guy who makes everything happen. Um, our beloved Tar Heels pulled out another win, 90-68 against Lehigh. Um, I think it's hard to really take games or take things from games like this, but I think there are definitely a few things that I kind of saw as the game went on. Once again, obviously it's hard to win in college basketball, so we have to praise them for pulling out a win. Um, but I think, as I'm kind of watching this and as I'm thinking, I hate going back to my time in North Carolina, but even as, watching previous UNC teams that had a lot of success, I think one of the biggest things, and you can you can kind of chime in on this one, but I think one of the biggest things whenever I'm watching this team just through the first two games, and it's early, once again, there's a lot of learning things that people getting comfortable with each other and, freshmen coming in trying to figure things out. So it's super early. But I think just seeing these teams, Radford and Lehigh now, stick around all the way through halftime, I think is kind of my one of my biggest takeaways kind of while I'm watching the game. Um, that I think if better, more talented teams are able to stick around the way that these teams are, I think could be a problem for this team. Um, I think obviously we'll get into it a little bit, but I think that's one of my biggest, if you want to call it a worries whenever I look at this team this season is, obviously they end up winning big on the scoreboard by the end of the game, but when you're playing, in a few games, teams like Tennessee or things like that, I think that can cause problems. And I think that kind of goes right into, some of the takeaways that I kind of saw. I kind of felt like this game there was kind of a fluctuation of effort that they gave defensively. I think there were times when you really saw them get up into the ball and you really saw them pressure. You saw a few times in the second half they had some full court pressure. They were kind of causing, Lehigh to kind of, you know, get out of rhythm and get out of how they like to play. And I think that's huge. Obviously, it's not realistic to expect a team to be able to play press defense the entire game. It's a long game. 40 minutes is a lot of time. Um, but just seeing that energy, I think you kind of saw lulls in there. I know, they talked about it on the broadcast a ton, but I know Coach Davis, was talking about going into this game that one of the biggest things was defending the 3-point line. Um, but when you kind of saw in the first half, guys were pretty comfortable. Obviously, they had some guys that are pretty decent players and pretty good scorers that, in their conference they're going to do some really big things. But you just kind of saw them kind of running their offense, and guys just getting open looks or, not as contested as you saw as the second half went on. And I think that's kind of probably the biggest thing for this team is can they be consistent from the effort side of things? And defensively, obviously, it's the easiest way to see the effort, throughout the game. So I think watching that, I think defensively, their consistency went kind of up and down. And like I said, it's early. Defense is the same as offense. You have to figure out how certain guys like to defend or, when you need to be in certain help side or things like that. So it's super early. But I think as watching the game, I think that's kind of what I saw. Offensively, obviously, I think everybody's going to talk about Mondo and his 2020 game. Um, but I think, one thing for me that was really encouraging and positive to see was see RJ get going and kind of see him settle in and get a hot game in there. Obviously, I think against Radford he didn't shoot it as well as I think even he would want to shoot it. So kind of seeing him be aggressive, from the jump and do what he did was really encouraging. Um, and then it's going to be kind of a hard to understand when I say it, but I think something that was encouraging too was the fact that they didn't shoot it well from the outside and still were able to win by 22 points. I think I've repeatedly talked about how it's exciting to kind of see a team now that can shoot it, that can, space the floor a lot better this year and cause more space for Mondo and RJ and guys to be able to get downhill. Um, And so to see them not be able to shoot it, which I think is going to be one of their biggest strengths, and still be able to come out on top the way that they did, I think was encouraging to me, because you add 5, 6 of those threes that they missed, this game is probably a 35, 40 point blowout. So, I think for me, those were some encouraging signs. And so, hopefully, that the basketball, one thing that I think fans kind of miss is basketball is such a game of ups and downs. It just is how it is. You might shoot 75% from three one game, and the next three games you might not be able to throw it into the ocean. And so, having the first two games where I think they're shooting 32% through the first two games and from three, and having that, but still being able to come out on top, for me is a great sign as opposed to why are they not hitting threes. So I think that's going to be something big to continue to watch, and hopefully they can kind of get on track and get hot a little bit here.
Yeah, you're listening to Shooting It Straight with Justin Jackson. This is episode 3. We want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors as well. Johnny T-shirt, you can check them out at johnnytshirt.com or on Franklin Street, and Congruity HR. They're North Carolina based HR that powers small and mid-sized businesses. So shout out to both of our sponsors there. I wanted to come back though, Justin, to what you said there about some of the concerns with how close these games were, to kind of dig in one step deeper. UNC trailed 41-38 with around 2 minutes left in the first half against Radford. And against Lehigh, UNC led by only 3 with 13 minutes left in the second half. Now, the advanced stats, the minimum win probabilities there, they never really dipped below 88%. So the game was never really in doubt. But when you see that, and it's now happened in the first 2 games of the season, does the flag go up a little bit in your eyes? And are you starting to maybe be a little bit concerned? Because we also saw this a little bit last year. UNC struggled in some of the early games, and then the next thing you know, they had a 4-game losing streak.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think it's too early to say that red flags are going up. I think, we have to take into account that they didn't shoot the ball well from three. So that obviously kind of changes the game plan up a little bit. You go into a game expecting guys who are knockdown shooters to knock down the shots. And so when you have guys that can't seem to find it that night, you have to find other ways to just win the game. And obviously, I think, a big part of that is obviously Mondo on the glass and him inside. Um, but I think there's just other ways that they were able to, you know, take advantage of certain things. And like I talked about, it's hard enough to win in college basketball. It doesn't matter who it is that you're playing against. Lehigh is a talented team. They had some guys that were, really scoring the ball well. They had some bigs down low. They were trying to make it as difficult as they possibly could on Mondo. Um, so I don't know if it's necessarily a red flag. I think it's something to definitely be aware of, especially as the season goes on. They've got some big games coming up, a big tournament coming up, over Thanksgiving, and you can't have these lulls and these situations where these teams that probably that you're better than stick around. The problem with basketball too is it's a game all about confidence, and so if you give a team that shouldn't be in the game with you. If you give them confidence, there's no telling what might happen. And so, I think it's too early to say, oh man, they really got to pick it up here. But I think at the same time, if they want to be the team that I think that they can be, and make a run and try to win the whole thing, I think from start to finish, they have to come out like the dominant team that I think that they can be. It was interesting. As I was watching the game, I was talking actually to my dad, and I just asked him because he was obviously a spectator and a fan as I was at school. Was there ever times when I was at school that we had these type of games where we should blow this team out? We're way more talented than this team, but we just kind of let them hang around. We kind of let them stick around. We go into halftime, maybe we're down or we're barely up, and go into the second half, and we're still struggling. We just can't really get over that hump until we finally do. And, he told me he was like, I don't think there ever really was a game like that. When y'all were better than a team, y'all went out there and y'all proved that and showed that. I think it's a little different because I'm going to continue to go back to it. It is such a new team, and they've got so many new players trying to figure out, where on the floor offensively and defensively they should be effective and where they can help their teammates and what they can do to help this team win. So it's a little bit different because our team, we had been with each other for at least 2 years. And so it was, we were just kind of picking right back up from where we were. So I think we also have to keep in mind that they are still gelling and they are still getting used to each other. But at the same time, like I said, for them to be as good of a team as I think that they can be, from start to finish, they have to be that dominant team, and that's make or miss, shots from the outside. There has to be an ability to be able to look at each other and say, hey, look, we're more talented than this team, we're more athletic than this team, we're better overall than this team. We have to go out there and show it from the jump. And so I think hopefully going forward, I think maybe these two games, maybe, we're kind of okay, guys, we got to make sure to pick it up, because we can't go into, like you said, it was 13 minutes left in the game and they were up 3 points, or down three. So, it's, I think it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And I think, I'm sure Coach Davis and that coaching staff will do a great job of kind of, reiterating that to them that, what, every minute is important. It doesn't matter what team we're playing against. Because the problem is when you're in these Thanksgiving tournaments and things like that coming up, there's really no more warm up games per se. It's right into it. So you don't have as much of a learning curve as you usually would when you're not playing in those type of tournaments. So I think that's kind of what it is. I wouldn't say that I'm concerned about it, um, but I think also, going off of that, you look at that and it was kind of the same for the Radford game from, I think it was like 13 and a half minutes to about 5 minutes. They only held them to 6 points. Um, so that obviously shows, and that was kind of during the time when you kind of saw the defensive energy kind of pick up and get a little bit more. It's always funny how basketball works. Defensively, when you're locked in, offense seems to come so much easier and smoother. Um, and so you kind of saw them get stops. They got in transition. RJ hit a couple buckets. Mondo had some down low. Offense just kind of seemed to move and be a little more smooth. And so, that right there is impressive. That's basically 8 minutes of holding these guys to 6 points. That's pretty impressive in a college basketball game. So, you know, going off of, oh man, they only have 3 points, but then all of a sudden they go on a huge run and are able to hold these guys to, that amount of points and still score on the other end, I think is another testament to kind of them sticking with it and finding a way to pull the game out. So I think that was a good sign to see. Even in the game when you're kind of like, man, we can't get it going. We don't necessarily have, that oomph tonight. But we're able to, when it comes down to winning time, we're able to lock it in and figure it out. So, I think that was a big sign going into and hopefully carrying it over into the next game that they have.
You brought up RJ and Armando as well. I've been so impressed with them so far this season. To me, they just seem like professionals. They don't seem like college basketball players in terms of their consistency, what they're bringing to the table every single night. It feels like and it's true too. They're a little bit older than some of their peers at the college level. They know exactly what's expected them night in and night out. You referenced RJ's shooting as well. He's been on fire from the long two range. He's 5 of 6, 83% on twos longer than 15 feet. That's from CBB Analytics. So that's just sort of the sweet spot for RJ. I wanted to talk about Armando as well because we've gotten the chance to kind of look at what his game looks like with some more spacing on the floor. And we've kind of seen the impact of UNC shooting on his game.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's funny because people almost get tired of, I'll call it greatness, but people almost get tired of seeing consistency. Like people want to see, oh, who's the new guy on the block? Who's the new guy that's, being effective? But with Mondo, for all the years that he's been at school, he's done exactly what he's done and been very consistent doing it. I mean, there's a reason why by the time that he, leaves school and graduates, not only is he going to be in history books at UNC, but in all of college basketball and for sure in the ACC, he's probably going to have his name on a lot of different parts of the record books. And so, that only comes from being consistent. So when you see, it's funny because even as consistent and as good as he has been, to the naked eye, when you really look at his game, he probably could be averaging 30 and 15, like just from some of the bunnies that he's missed and things like that. But on the other hand, when I watch his game, one thing that he's done great at in these first two games is free throw shooting, and being somebody that, dominates on the block so much. Sometimes the only thing that the opposing teams can do is foul you and hope you miss free throws. So to see him being consistent at the free throw line is, I think, a huge step, in the right direction for him. But like we said, when you kind of break down how the offense looks this year, right? And we talk about RJ and Mondo and how they're kind of the main, catalysts of this team. Well, it also the supporting cast around is also very important, even if they're not involved in the play, right? So you look at this play right here.
And this is from last year, from the Virginia game. This is a screenshot. If you're listening on podcast, we're walking through a screenshot of a play from that game. I think Justin's going to take us through this one and one from this year as well.
Right, right. So just bear with me if you're just listening. If you're watching, hopefully you can follow. Um, but when you look at this, it's obviously RJ passing the ball into Mondo on the block. Well, everybody else is basically around the perimeter. And it's a little different here because it's Virginia and their defense is a little bit more, they kind of try to keep everybody inside the 3-point line and kind of pack the paint. The whole pack line defense is tough to play against. But when you look at this, Mondo's getting the ball in the block, and there's already basically three guys facing him. The guy that's guarding RJ that passed the ball into him isn't he has his back completely to RJ. They're sending another guy from the next pass, which in this picture is Puff. They're sending him all the way from the opposite slot, which is basically when you look at the paint, you take it all the way up towards half court. They call it the slot, basically from that area. It's the middle of the floor, and then right next to that is the slot. So Puff is right there in the slot, and that's where they're sending the opposite help. Well, then the opposite side is has at least 1 foot in the paint as well. So you basically have five players playing defense on Mondo in the paint. Now, like I said, that can be Virginia's defense, that can be their schemes, but I think you saw this a whole lot last year, where it was basically the teams were daring all the other guys on the floor to shoot the ball as long as they get the ball out of Mondo's hands. And so that's if Mondo is going to be their number one guy, you're just making his night extremely difficult if there is any kind of room that he can do to make moves. If not, he's having to kick it out, and then we're having to rely on these guys who weren't necessarily proven knockdown shooters at all times. We're relying on them to be a huge focal point of the game. So then you have the other picture. So then when you look at the next picture from their first game against Radford this year, he gets the ball in the block, and there's one player with only 1 foot in the paint. And everybody else is on offense for us. North Carolina is spaced out around the 3-point line. And then everybody else is closer to bodies because they know the threats that they pose from the outside. And so I think, we've talked about it a little bit through, the first two episodes, but I think when you look at this picture right here, there's not many bigs in the entire country that can keep Mondo from getting to where he wants to get in this situation. So now, even if somebody were to say, okay, hey, look, we need to double him when he gets the ball. Now, if somebody, and once again, if you're just listening, it's going to be kind of tough to follow this, but now if let's say Cormac is the one to pass the ball into Mondo right there on the block, now it's such a longer way for the guy guarding him to go double. It's such a longer way for the guy guarding Harrison to go double, and everybody else. It's such a longer way that it gives Mondo more space to make a move and do whatever he needs to do quicker. Um, and then if Mondo decides to pass it out, because it's such a longer run, it's a way longer run to get back to your man or for guys to get into rotation defensively. So then you can get whatever you want because you're just playing off of closeouts and guys trying to just run you off the 3-point line. And so I think when I see this type of picture, I think that would get this is what gets me so much more excited because it opens things up so much more offensively, right? You have your main guy going one on one with somebody that more than likely can't keep him away from the rim. And then if they start to try to make adjustments, then it just opens things up completely for your offense. Um, and so I think when you watch, these first two games, I think obviously there are things that you can nitpick and there's things that you can see that they can do better. But this right here automatically makes their offense better. And so, with the shots and things like that, like we talked about previously, there are guys that have proven that they are knockdown shooters. Obviously they haven't been able to find it fully in the first two games, but when you have that kind of space, and then all of a sudden when the ball starts moving around and you're, you know, playing with a guy trying to close out, 3 feet away as a shooter, then the rim seems to just get so much bigger because you have more time to lock in. You've got time to make sure that your mechanics are right, your follow through is right, all that kind of stuff. And so I think that right there is hopefully the picture that we see throughout the whole year. And once again, going back to Mondo's consistency, it's going to all be based off of what his consistency has been because he's going to now, have the room to do what he needs to do or make the defense, you know, make adjustments and do things like that. Um, so I think that was one of the big. That's been one of the coolest things to me is kind of seeing how their offense has kind of evolved this year, just purely off of having guys that can space and knock down shots. And so then all of a sudden, you know, kind of talking about guys coming off the bench, then you've got, athletes and things like that, Elliott, and, I think Withers is going to be somebody that, you kind of see him hopefully step into a little bit of a bigger role. And, you kind of see guys like that who can get downhill and are really great drivers, all of a sudden have so much more space as well, which then creates even more problems for the defense. And so, hopefully that's the picture they keep. Hopefully they kind of, watch that and they make sure that they, consistently play that way offensively. But I think that's what's so big for me, is just kind of seeing that space to operate.
And something to watch as well that goes along with that is Armando's turnover numbers and maybe even as well his assist to turnover ratio. So just to pull out the numbers here, last season Armando had 45 assists to 71 turnovers. This season, small sample size, 2 games, but he has 2 assists to 2 turnovers. So if he can kind of keep those turnover numbers low and maybe pass out of some of those potential double teams if they come to those open shooters. I think that's another way that the offense can improve. We talked about Armando improving his free throw percentage, but if he's also improving his turnovers and keeping those down this season, that's another big jump that he's made.
For sure. And I think that's obviously we talk about, everybody kind of gets tired of consistency. You kind of start once somebody has been so good for so long, you start really having to be, almost nitpicky as far as what's something that they can get better at and things like that. So I think, to your point, I think kind of the free throws and taking care of the ball, which I mean, if I had three guys, if my back was to the basket and I had three guys basically swarming me every single time I got the ball on the block, it'd be hard for me to keep my, assist to turnover ratio, high as well, which I think, a part of it is, if, he is such a great player, so it does fall on him as far as taking care of the ball. But, that is a lot harder to go against as opposed to that second picture that we saw where it's just him versus one guy and he's already got him almost underneath the rim. Um, and so I think that's, you know, something that I think will continue. I think a lot of times, this kind of goes back to practice. I think, you work on it all the time, whether it's spacing or different ways to get him the ball in the post and how to space around that. So I'm sure they're working on all of that, you know, through practice and things like that, which is, I think kind of what takes me to my next point when it comes to um, the bench. And I think for so long, the last few years, it's been who's going to be that bench guy that comes in and is able to consistently provide for this team, whether it is for 15 minutes or some games, it might be for 25, 30 minutes if foul trouble's involved or if they've got it going or whatever it might be. But I think for most fans when they watch, I think their obvious answer would probably be Elliott. Um, I think when I watch it, I think, like I had mentioned, I think Withers is somebody that I think could really be big for this team. Coming off the bench and bringing an athletic, guy that can guard multiple positions, can get downhill, cause really put pressure on the rim and on defenses when it comes to that. Um, Obviously we've watched the freshman Zayden, come in and try to provide as much energy. It's hard to really, um, put, I guess I would say a lot of, hope maybe is the right word, that freshmen can come in right away and really give you that punch off the bench. Um, but I think when I see the guys on the bench, I've kind of seen some things of people saying, Elliott needs to play more, he should be starting, yada yada. I think when you see who's playing and who's not, a lot of times it goes back to practice and it goes to how has off season been, how has practices been, you know how have they looked and how hard have they worked throughout practices and the off season workouts and things like that. So as fans, you just kind of see names, right? Like, oh, Elliot Cadeau, he was this highly touted high school player, reclassed. Yes, we get a really great player, and Elliot is by all means a extremely good basketball player. Um, but I think a lot of times we have to take a step back when we're watching the games and say, okay, well, these coaches are with these players all the time in practice. What do they look like in practice? How hard do they go in practice? Um, and so, it's hard for me to really say who should play more, who shouldn't play more. I think you will see Elliott kind of play around the same amount that he's playing now. I think, like I said, I think you're going to see Jalen Withers play a little bit more. I think he's going to be that second guy off the bench. Um, and then after that, it's probably just kind of up to whatever the game plan is in particular games, what the matchups are. If another team is big, you might see Jalen Washington play more. Um, if they have more of a versatile four man or whatever, you might see Zayden Hyde play a little bit more. But I think the two guys that I think are going to be, consistently playing a decent amount off the bench are those two guys, Elliott and Withers. And, obviously, it'll be, kind of a learning curve for both of those guys coming over. One's a freshman, one's coming from a totally different system. Elliott's still a freshman. He's it's okay for him to go through some of the freshman adjustments. Every player goes through it. And so I think sometimes when you see certain situations happen to him, a lot of times it's just unfortunate, because of, okay, this guy's a lot faster in recovering than the guy that I was going against last year in high school. It was, or this pass usually is there for me every single time. Well, these guys are a little bit longer, a little bit stronger, able to get through screens a little bit more. So, like I said, it's okay for him to have those situations, but I think Coach Davis is going to do a great job of working with him while also giving him those minutes to grow through them. And I think, he's going to help this team, an extreme amount as the season goes on.
North Carolina plays on Friday against UC Riverside before their big tournament next week over the Thanksgiving holiday. Justin, what's like the one or two things that you're going to be looking for in this third game of the season? Not to call it a tune-up game, but UC Riverside is a little bit of a lighter opponent. What will you be looking for that you want to see UNC clean up or maybe improve upon from the first two games?
I think there's a few things. I think for me, kind of seeing if they can get on track shooting wise. If guys like Cormac and obviously we saw RJ get hot, but guys like Cormac, Pax, Harrison, if they can kind of get on track and get hot a little bit, get in rhythm, as they go into that tournament, I think that's going to be key for them. I think defensively, it's going to be big to kind of see the effort and the energy from start to finish. It doesn't really matter, like we talked about before. It doesn't matter who they're playing against. It's still another opportunity to kind of go out, and show. I think a lot of times, players kind of take for granted that, you know, these games aren't as important because the teams are a little less talented. I know I did when I was at school. I know, it just happens as a human. You're kind of like, okay, we're way better than this team. We're going to go out here, we're going to win, whatever. But a lot of times these are opportunities, whether it's opportunities to get better at something, whether it's opportunities to show the country that, hey, these guys are the real deal, whether it's opportunities to gel more as a team, get better offensively and defensively, figuring out each other as players. There's a ton of opportunities in these type of games. And as coaches, there's opportunities as well. A lot of times coaches use these kind of games to kind of see who they can trust and who they can rely on for, once these harder games and stretches of games start to come up. So I think as players, they have to look at this game as just an opportunity, another opportunity to go out there and play, obviously, the wonderful game of basketball, um, but also a way to get better, in whatever aspects they need to get better individually and as a team. And so that's what I'm looking for, I think, defensively and shooting wise, and just kind of seeing if they can, get those meshed together in a full game. Because I think if they get those fully meshed, I think that this team could really be really good. And um, so hopefully, I'm sure that's what Coach Davis is kind of talking about, and all the other coaches are talking about, throughout practice this week. And obviously, you never look past an opponent, but when you look at kind of the stretches of games they're going to have coming up, this is a opportunity to prepare for this season going forward. And we're going to go in there. We're going to respect this team enough to play extremely hard, to do the things that we can do, and hopefully come out of there with a win.
Yeah, you brought up the preseason tournament as well. I wanted to talk about that a little bit, and we have some listener questions as well about the preseason tournaments. Last year, UNC had a little bit of a rougher time in that Thanksgiving tournament. But it's also, like you said, an opportunity to gel a little bit as a team. You don't get that many back-to-backs in college basketball really at all, unless you're maybe counting, the NCAA tournament time or
Mhm.
something. So you get the opportunity as well to maybe build some momentum, put a few games back to back to back, and really play well as a team. How do you think about those tournaments as a player, and what do you think UNC should do to maybe avoid some of the tougher results that they had last year in the tournament?
I think it's that same mindset. It's once again, it's an opportunity, and it's a chance for you to go out here and play. For one, the coolest thing for me when I was a player in college, and even now as a fan watching, is to see teams that would never play against each other unless it was this kind of tournament or March Madness. To
Mhm.
see them go against each other, the different styles that you're playing against, and the different kinds of players that maybe, you know, SEC is totally different basketball than the ACC. Same thing for all the other conferences. There's just different brands of basketball. And so to see, for North Carolina, if they were to run into certain teams, to see those matchups for me is very exciting. Just to kind of see how they're able to. For one, it's short notice. Each game is you might not know who you're playing until 9 o'clock that night. Um, so to kind of see how they prepare, how they get ready for these different teams, these different styles, I think is very exciting. And I think as a player, it's fun because okay, we actually get to play against a different team than we see two or three times throughout the year. So I think that's kind of the coolest things for playing these kind of tournaments for that. Plus, you're one of there's so much more attention on your tournaments and on your games because it's during the holidays. That's also such a cool thing for players is I know I have a ton of people tuned in watching this game because they're sitting at home eating mashed potatoes and eating turkey and ham and just enjoying my basketball game. So um, I think it should be a good once again, a good opportunity, a good chance for them to go in there and try to do what they can do and hopefully put the country on notice as far as the kind of team that they can be and how people should be ready for them.
Let's talk a little bit about off the court as well, because we have our first listener question here. If you ever want to submit a question to the show, reach out to Justin on Twitter or hit us up on the Inside Carolina message boards. We'll take listener questions throughout the season. This one is from Humphrey14. He asks, how much freedom do you get during the Thanksgiving tournament? I assume Roy Williams isn't riding the slides with you at the Atlantis resort, but I'm sure you guys get to have some fun as well as a team.
Yeah, my first year, my freshman year, we actually got lucky because we went to the Bahamas twice that year. The first time was more of a, we had two scrimmages, but the first time was more of a almost like a vacation together type of thing. We even lost that year, which it was to like the Bohemian All Stars or something like that. Um, we lost in one of those games.
Wait, was that the
Um,
one that Carl Anthony Towns was on, or am I way off?
no, it was DeAndre Ayton.
That's right.
He
There
was
was
on that
someone like
team.
that. Yeah.
Um, and we should have known he was going to be as good as he is now from that particular game.
Hmm.
But so that was the time that we were able to kind of experience the Bahamas, experience Atlantis. We were able to go down, the slides if you wanted to. Obviously, I don't think people are you know too happy about it, but the gambling age is a different age there in the Bahamas. So if you enjoy doing that. And obviously nowadays we've got old enough players on these teams that have probably been gambling for 2, 3 years at this point. So, um, we were able to experience all of that then. So then when we came back for the actual Battle of Atlantis, it was a lot more about basketball than enjoying yourself. But at the same time, it's Thanksgiving. I'm sure some people will have their family in town to kind of be there for them. But one thing that I always love about Coach Williams, and I'm sure Coach Davis does the same thing, on Thanksgiving they would always have basically a full Thanksgiving meal. It was the mashed potatoes, the mac and cheese, green beans, ham, turkey, all that kind of stuff, all that good stuff. They would always have that for us. So we were able to kind of have that kind of experience. Obviously, we weren't at our homes and things like that, but they tried their best to make that, feel as normal as possible. So that was huge. Um, but I mean, with these tournaments, it's like I said, it's just another game, and that's kind of how you have to approach it. And it's a situation where these games are important when it comes down to, when you get to tournament time and these, committees are picking, these different teams for different seeds and things like that. These are the type of games that they'll go back and look at. Are these good or bad losses that they had? How well did they do against these different opponents? So, these are it's one of those things you have to kind of look big picture. Obviously we want to win these games. We want to, you know, be prepared as much as possible for the now, but also how is this going to affect us going throughout the season? So, I think it's just another one of those times where you got to look at it as another game and get locked in as possible.
You have to assume UNC would have loved to have won that game against Alabama in 4 overtimes. That would have helped come tournament time
Exactly.
last year, so that shows that these games definitely matter. I'm gonna get one more, listener question in here. This one is from, your old coach. He commented. No, it's probably not him. Hall of Fame Coach Roy. He said, "Thoughts on the program overall since Hubert took over? And thoughts on Hubert as a head coach. You had a relationship with him when you were
Mhm.
playing there, but now that you're a little bit away from the program, what have you seen from him as a head coach?"
Yeah, I mean, like you said, my relationship with him before, it's a little different being an assistant as opposed to a head coach. The relationships are just a little different. But I love Coach Davis. I still to this day, as a man, Coach Davis is one of the most amazing men I've ever been around. And I think he carries that into the way that he coaches and his style of coaching. I think that's how he, interacts with the players. I think that's how he interacts with the staff. Um, and so for me, when I kind of look at his, whole picture of him as a head coach in North Carolina, for one, you have to take into account that he took over for arguably one of the best college basketball coaches of all time in Coach Williams. And so you kind of see that it seems like it's just another coach kind of filling in, but the traditions and the um, just the things that Coach Williams brought to this university and this program, it's hard to step into that with everybody expecting everything to be the exact same as how Coach Williams was. So you have to take that into account. Then you have to take into account his first year, he took them to the championship game. Now, they struggled that year leading up to the tournament, right? But when it came down to winning time, they almost won the entire thing, which is what teams work for all season to work to. So then you look at last season. which some most people, and I would probably say even myself, look at it as kind of a disappointment of not making the tournament, didn't play very well. Um, and you look at how he handled that personally, right? Like he took the blame. He made certain decisions in the offseason to bring certain transfers in and bring, these freshmen in and, kind of picked certain guys that he felt like would fit into a winning situation, a winning culture. And now they have this team that's built that I think is built with everything that they need to make a long run. And so I'll continuously say it. I think Coach Davis is by far the right man for the job. I think, going anywhere else, I think Coach Davis brings exactly what you want, what you need for a really good head coach of a winning program. And so for me, I'm extremely happy to see Coach Davis at the helm. I'm extremely happy to see him standing on the sidelines, making all the calls and being the guy who runs things over there on that side. And so I think he's going to continue to get better. I think he's one of the big things that's going for him is he's a huge players coach. He's able to interact with the players and handle the players in a way that makes them want to play for him, that makes him want to play hard for him. So, I think he's doing an unbelievable job. I think he's going to continue to do better and probably even better as time goes on and as the season goes on. So, I think Hall of Fame Coach Roy. I think that this is exactly who we want to be there for this University of North Carolina basketball team.
Awesome. That's a great place to end tonight's show, I think, as well. Like I said earlier, UNC has a game on Friday, and then stay tuned next week for full coverage of the Battle for Atlantis tournament, possibly a special show for Justin and I to cover some of next week's games. More to come on that later. Justin, any final thoughts before we get out of here for episode 3?
No, I think just be ready. We'll see what happens with Thanksgiving. It might be a kind of a different situation for next week's episode. But once again, I'll always go back to thank you for everybody listening and watching and tuning in. We really do appreciate you. And, this is enjoyable for both of us. I hate to speak for you, John, but this is enjoyable for both of us to be able to just talk about, the best college in the country, kind of break some things down and, help some people, that might be confused about certain things. So thank y'all once again. We appreciate you. And yeah, we'll talk to y'all next week.